Oh, you want to buy Fallout 3? No need, we've got Fallout 3 at home. My name is Graeldon and I'm reviewing Steam games in alphabetical order to find the hidden gems among the piles of garbage, and today's game is 10 years after. Let's begin. It's early 2015 and the release of Fallout 4 is on the horizon. You've already played through Fallout 3 twice and New Vegas 3 times, so you don't want to go back to those games, but you do want to find a similar game that will scratch the same itch. So you're browsing Steam when you stumble upon 10 years after. It's in early access, but it's been receiving frequent updates, and the store page lists all of the things you would expect from a similar game. A fully voiced, character-driven storyline, audio diaries from the city's inhabitants, survival systems including hunger and thirst mechanics, player crafting, hunting, infected, guns, melee items, dynamic weather, a day and night cycle, even the apocalyptic radio broadcast that made exploring Fallout's wasteland an absolute treat. Instead of a world-ending nuclear event though, this apocalypse was brought about by an injection, one that was intended to bring about world peace by stemming violence and quelling human emotions. You can get more of the story by watching one of the videos on the store page, which goes on to explain just how everything went wrong, and then 2 other videos that show off some of the gameplay and mechanics in action. Escaping from a hospital, fighting off the infected and raiders, mining and gathering resources. It looks rough, but it does show signs of potential. So, imagine my surprise and immediate disappointment when I started the game in a trailer park. Oh yeah, we've got ourselves a good old bait and switch, so let's just see how bad this gets. Starting up the game, we have a standard Unity launcher, and with max settings enabled, the game simply fails to launch. It also can't be closed, so it's good old Task Manager to the rescue, but only after opening it in a second desktop because everything on that screen is frozen. Great start. So, with the graphics lowered, we actually get into the game and see the main menu, and as the buttons slide in from the side like some middle schooler's PowerPoint presentation, you just know that someone was awfully proud of figuring out how to do that, because they do it again in the options menu. It's also here that I discover several issues with the click boxes for the icons. On the main menu, you can see that I can drag the cursor off the button almost to the next one down and still have the first one highlighted. The most frustrating example of this is found by dragging the mouse sensitivity slider to the right. Now, attempting to click the slider again instead causes you to click the full screen option. You can see it highlighted here, even though my cursor is clearly on the slider, not the button. It's always fun to see so many problems when we're not even into the gameplay yet. A loading screen gives us some brief exposition and advises us to be aware because our choices will affect how others view us. Spoilers, they don't. The only choices you will make are to choose to accept a quest or not, typical protagonist stuff. After exiting the trailer, I go to talk to the nearest person, but can't figure out how the heck to talk to them and eventually move on. Turns out there was a tiny tooltip at the top of the screen, but being the dummy that I am, I missed it. I did figure it out later, but for now the game has given me some blue waypoints to follow, so off we go. Upon reaching the last one, they simply vanish with no further instructions. I figure I'm meant to talk to the guy, Tony, but having missed the prompt, I still don't know how. So, after wandering for a moment, I press escape, groan at the misaligned menu buttons, and open the quest log, which shows absolutely nothing. Helpful. I go back to Tony, finally figure out the button, and we get some backstory. Via text. Because the voice acting isn't in the game yet. Which is weird, because it was definitely in the footage shown in the trailer.
What a pleasant surprise.
You know what would be more pleasant? Getting out of this place. You got any ideas?
Tony tells us that we were rescued by Jimmy during a supply run and brought back here, so he recommends we go chat to Jimmy, who happens to be the person we tried to speak to the first time. So, poor Jimmy has just seen the guy he rescued wake up, stare him down, and then just walk away. Not a great first impression, but let's go have a chat, see if we can smooth things over. On my way over, I find a pile of metal which can be collected by pressing F, and after opening the inventory with I see a crafting system. Hovering the cursor over the metal, we can see that it is useful for crafty, the first of many tooltips that either don't fit in the text box or float over the edge of the screen. There are 5 recipes on the left, inconsistently spaced out because of course they are, and clicking each one will show you the required materials and the result. The materials are listed by name, but the result is just an image, so until you've made it once, it's hard to tell exactly what you're about to make. Recipe 1 uses 3 cloth to make a health kit, Recipe 2 uses metal scraps and duct tape to make shotgun shells, don't ask how that works. Recipe 3 uses sticks, metal scraps and duct tape to make a spiked bat, Recipe 4 uses a pan and metal scraps to make pistol ammo, and Recipe 5 does exactly the same. Keep in mind the following 3 things. Firstly, the game will never explain this system to you. Secondly, the quantity needed for some items, like metal scraps, is unknown because the text cuts it off. And thirdly, the shotgun shells are useless because you can't find a shotgun in the game. So, all things considered, we're off to a great start. Jimmy tells us about the food bank in the camp and then suggests we go back to Tony if we're looking for something to do. Tony has heard about some stray infected heading this way and asks us to go grab a weapon to help defend the camp. Both the weapons store and food banks are other trailers in the camp, and as soon as I enter the weapons store, the alarms start going off. I gear up and head outside to fend off the approaching zombies. So, take a moment to admire the combat. Between the cheesy punch sound effect of the nearby NPC trying to help out, the frantic shuffling of the zombies, the weirdly stretched and distorted models, the snap to a T-pose on death, and the fact that I was now stuck in the ground and unable to move, I wasn't sure whether to laugh or simply rage quit right then and there. I hadn't even saved yet, so I'd have to start again if I couldn't get out, but thankfully dropping down a save and then reloading it allowed me to break free and carry on. This would end up being the first of many times that I got stuck, as less than 5 minutes later I got caught on a chest while exploring and forced to reload again. After the first time though, I never used the same technique again, simply because the game only has one save file. And if after an hour or more of enduring this rubbish I somehow managed to softlock myself in a wall and be forced to start all over again, I would have been devastated. I actually got stuck and forced to reload a total of 3 times before eventually getting out of the trailer park and being able to proceed with the first actual mission, tracking down another survivor and camp member, Josh, who went out on a patrol 2 days ago and then went missing. He had radioed ahead to inform Tony that he'd found the password to a laptop and then nothing was heard since. So, using my uncanny knack for knowing exactly where to go find a person I'd never met before in an unfamiliar area, we begin to head off, only to be immediately sidetracked by the discovery of vehicles. Sure, it's a beat up old truck, but it still works. Also, check out the detail on this plant. Neat. After jumping in the truck, we begin to make our way towards Josh's last known location and discover that location markers don't work when inside vehicles. It usually just continues to point in the same direction it was when you entered the vehicle, but the distance will still calculate correctly so you can kind of figure out where to go. But also, sometimes this happens. After nearly getting stuck in a ravine, I finally find Josh, who's suffering from T-pose disease, and damn, the game is bugged. I can't interact with him at all. So you know what this means. Time to reload the last save. And it's at this point that I notice that the game isn't actually reloading a save. Instead, it's just teleporting me back to the last location I saved at. Hunger and thirst will also reset, but ammo doesn't, and apparently neither do vehicles, as the truck is still over by Josh's corpse, forcing me to run half a kilometer back to his body, roughly a third of a mile for all you imperialists. It's around this time that it starts getting dark, and oh boy does it get dark. In fact, I apologize because at some point in this video, unless Ty does some editing magic, and possibly even then, you'll just be looking at a black screen with a few UI elements. But then if you've got me on a second monitor while you're doing something else, I guess the experience hasn't changed much. Anyway, we make it back to Josh, and this time we can talk to him, and much to my surprise, he talks back. Not out loud though, because remember, there's no voice acting in this game, but he does respond in the chat window. We've now got the password for the laptop, so we head back to the trailer park and inform Tony that he's going to need to hire a new scout. While we're making our way back, check out these amazing car physics. Fun fact, it's impossible to destroy your vehicle and it never runs out of fuel. Even if it lands upside down, it'll just respawn back in the right way up. Your hunger and thirst also don't decrease while driving, so vehicles are definitely the meta in this game, which is useful knowledge for when you're in multiplayer mode. More on that later. Before we head into the camp, I'd also like to point out how bright the clouds are. While this game does indeed have a day-night cycle, it's busted AF because many of the environmental objects just don't behave properly with the lighting. Also, right at the start, we picked up a torch. As far as I can tell, it doesn't work, and there's no way to make it work. I pressed every button I have access to, and I couldn't figure out how to make it turn on, so unless it's bound to an obscure button on an MMO mouse, I think it simply doesn't work. Tony asked us to finish Josh's mission by trying to find the laptop that we have a password for, which should be in the nearby town of Pineford. I head off, taking the trusty truck over the big hill/mountain, and arrive at the town, promptly smashing into an invisible barrier. Great. At least the truck is indestructible. Pineford is a lovely, quaint town, not that you can really tell from the excessively dark footage, and its biggest problem is that it's filled with a never-ending horde of shambling zombies that will respawn literally right on top of you. I find the one and only house in the entire town that still has furnishing inside. Seriously, every other house is devoid of furniture and there is no explanation why other than that the devs are lazy, and in the upstairs room we find the laptop. In a neat touch, to progress we actually have to type in the password from earlier. Yay for needing to pay attention! After choosing to view the sensitive data, we get the message, information about the injection will be here in the main game. And while I'm checking the quest log to figure out what the heck I do next, the storm outside abruptly stops. Which is something of a shame because the rain ambience is actually one of the very, very few things that I liked about this entire experience. After learning the presumably shocking contents on the laptop, I explore the town for a bit, then head back to the trailer park and discover a much cooler car available and take that for a spin. But not before climbing a nearby lookout, finding a sniper rifle, discovering that there is a separate pause menu that appears when you open the inventory that doesn't go away if you close the inventory with escape instead of I, and then having a chat with Tony. Tony tells us that he knows a guy who used to work for the government who might be able to help us, and he lives not too far from here. He marks the location on our map, except that he doesn't. There's no marker. None. Nothing. I check the quest log, maybe I just need to make it active. Nope. As far as I can tell, this is where the main quest currently ends. But this is such a large map, surely there are other things to find, right? What about the hospital and city that we saw in the trailer for the game? Well, by following the road out of the trailer park, you can actually find the city. On the way there, you can find a small gas station with a guy inside that claims that someone called Bear has it out for Tony and suggests that we take care of the problem before it becomes a bigger problem. The only problem is that the problem hasn't been put in the game yet. Or at least it hasn't been given a map marker, and I never stumbled upon him in my 3.5 hours of travels. I did find this camping ground though, which was totally abandoned. Nothing to be found here, sadly. But pressing on, I did find the city. It's an appropriately thematic ruin filled with shamblers, including 2 new types, infected hounds and super mutants, large infected. They move a bit faster, hit a bit harder, have more health and look slightly less ridiculous, but otherwise aren't much more of a threat. What is a threat is the weird geometry of the landscape. Floating buildings, walls that can be walked through from one direction, and of course, plenty of objects to get stuck on, requiring a reload. There's also an NPC here who asks you to head back to Pineford and kill a black market dealer for reasons. Lacking any other leads, I decide to haul myself all the way back, unalive the black market dealer who, despite the store description suggesting otherwise, seemed to have no problems receiving my high-speed lead delivery, and then trek back to the city again. My reward was 300 gold. An astonishingly useless currency given that there aren't any actual shops in the game. In a final attempt to find some semblance of fun in this game, I decide to travel as far as I can to see how big the map really is, and to see if I can find a void to throw myself in.
Oh, hail the void!
The good news is that I did indeed find the void. The bad news is that there was an invisible barrier, so no eternity of falling for us today. On the bright side, I did also find what appears to be a floating toilet, and a car that doesn't have a correct texture for the exhaust, resulting in purple squares coming out the back of the car. This is my favourite car. Purple Glitch Car and I travelled the map extensively and still failed to find any fun, so in a last ditch effort I decided to take a look at the multiplayer mode. By myself. To get there, I head back to the main menu, only to find that it is now showing the options for the pause menu in-game instead of the actual main menu, and now every button brings up the credits. One restart later, we're into multiplayer mode, so here it is in all its glory. There is only one game mode, Team Deathmatch. There's a 10-minute timer, and the team with the most kills at the end wins. Pretty standard stuff. There are some weapons scattered around the map, including ones not available in the main game, like an actual shotgun, automatic rifles, and even grenades. Although you spawn in a specific section of the map, such as the trailer park or Pineford, there aren't any barriers, so you can just leave and go somewhere else. There aren't any vehicles though, so my comment from earlier was a bit of a lie, which means that you'll be on foot, but all the same, the fact that you can just head out on an unplanned camping trip while the rest of your team fight it out is pretty amusing. Sadly, there wasn't too much else to be found here, so my final act in the game was to attempt to shoot myself in the foot, just to see if it worked. It doesn't, but I'm sure that didn't surprise anyone. So, as I went to quit the game, I hit escape, and I'm immediately booted back to the desktop, which feels like an appropriate reason to end the review, I guess. Game developers or companies promising the world and then delivering nothing aren't exactly new news, but to me it felt like this game was less of a scam and perhaps more of a mismanaged project by overly ambitious devs with poor communication skills. Or maybe it's just a scam and I'm being too nice. Either way, what we have for $6.49 Canadian is a bunch of Unity assets with less than a week's worth of actual effort. And the whole thing just seems so bizarre to me because it looks like they had the beginning of a fully functioning game at some point. A few levels with exploration, resource gathering, voice acted NPCs. It was there. And now it's gone, and with little to no explanation for why. The game is listed on Steam as being developed by Rock Paper Games, but looking through the update history, they actually took over from a different team called 10 Tree Games in November 2015. After this point, despite a few posts from the new devs, all development on the game basically ground to a halt, resulting in the game in its current form, much to the dismay of a few hopeful community members. Now, in fairness to the game, it is listed as being in early access, and it has not just one, but two disclaimers on the store page saying that this is a very early alpha version. So, I'm going to temper my critique somewhat in relation to this, but the reality is that this is still a paid experience, and you can outright kill your game by releasing it as a paid product with either no content or even worse, horribly broken content. Anyone that does try the game will see your work, and unless you're extremely quick to fix things and add new content, you'll be quickly written off as either naive, incompetent, or worse, as a scammer. 10 years after feels like the kind of game that was never really intended to be finished. It set impossible standards and clearly didn't have the talent in the team to fulfill that vision, so it floundered, sank, and ultimately died, now stuck in a state of half-death on Steam for the rest of eternity. Honestly, the best way to salvage this game would be to fix the existing bugs, finish writing the story, and then add set-piece locations for the player to infiltrate, grab items, retrieve intel, or save other survivors, and then return to the camp. Get rid of the crafting, and instead, have an actual shop where weapon upgrades and ammo are bought with gold, which is rewarded for completing quests, or found when scavenging supplies. Tell a short, cohesive story, and then move on. If the game ends up being successful, great! Use the experience and knowledge you've gained from making and releasing one game to then work on the next game, possibly in the same universe if it's been popular enough. The trap that so many fall into is simply aiming too high, being too ambitious. Here's the reality check you might need. You're not going to make the next Fallout game. Not alone, anyway. Bethesda had around 100 employees at the time of making Skyrim and the Fallout games, and now has over 450 employees, and I guarantee that they also have a much, much larger budget than you do. Not that the quality of their games necessarily reflects that, looking at how amazing Starfield was at launch. Wouldn't be a Bethesda game without bugs. Anyway, the point is, aim small. Aim achievable. You will learn more and grow more by working within realistic boundaries, and succeeding at something will push you onwards, rather than leaving a trail of failed or abandoned projects in your wake. So, with all of that in mind, my final rating for 10 years after is a flashlight out of 10. It doesn't work and never will. Thanks for watching. Welcome to the end of the video. As always, a massive thank you to all the channel members on screen for supporting the channel, with a special thank you to our Knight of the Holy Grail, Freaky Feline. I'd also like to thank you for joining me on this weird gaming adventure through the depths of Steam, and if you've made it this far, here's a sneak peek of the next game. Until next time, take care.